Hello again, gamers. Welcome back to the Board Game Captain. I'm the Captain, and today I'm going to be reviewing and talking about the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Lost Omens, the Mwangi Expanse. So the Mwangi Expanse, as I will refer to it from this point on in the review, is a setting book for the Pathfinder 2nd Edition role-playing game that allows you to play in the Mwangi Expanse. Now, the Mwangi Expanse is an area of the world that is roughly equivalent to the real world's West Africa, because most of the world of Golarion can be broken down as obviously being based on certain regions of the real world. This is in the part that, again, would equate to West Africa and Northwest Africa a little bit. So before we get too into this, I do want to give a big thank you to Paizo, the publisher of the Mwangi Expanse and all books for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, for sending me this free copy of the Mwangi Expanse to be able to read and check out and use in my games of Pathfinder and film some content with, like this review here. So big thank you to Paizo. In addition, I want to let you guys know I've got a ton of links in the description down below that you can check out at your leisure. There's a link to my Teespring store. You can get some cool gamer gear like this shirt I'm wearing here that says, "Hey, good looking, come to this dungeon often," as well as other shirts and mugs, etc. There's also a link to my Patreon. If you're in a position to it and would like to support the channel, you can head over to my Patreon, link in the description down below. And there is a link to my website, which is a great hub for all things Board Game Captain. BoardGameCaptain.com has links to all my various social media, my Teespring store, etc. So, without any further ado, we're going to get into what is in the Mwangi Expanse. So now, the Mwangi Expanse has a ridiculous number of authors and people involved with its production. A ton of people worked on this. I'm sure I'll be showing a picture up on the screen of all of them. Too many to mention, though, during this video, so that's why I'm just going to show the pic. For if you are interested for what authors and editors and designers were working on this. The design lead, though, was Mark Seifter. And again, as you've seen on the screen, ton of other artists, etc., worked on this this book. So again, this is a fantasy version of West and Northwest Africa. The area is loosely based on that area of the real world, and very much based on the folklore and mythology of that region of the world, because again, this is done in a fantasy world, but also it is supposed to be this particular area of Golarion, so there's a lot of peoples here that are based on the mythologies and folklores of other parts of the world, because since we're in Golarion, and a big part of the world of Golarion so far has been very much based on a lot of European folklore. So you have elves and dwarves and gnomes, etc. A lot of the mythical races from Europe. They've done African versions of those, in addition to new peoples based on folklore from West Africa. So, all right, so the beginning of this book, you start out with the Reclaiming the Expanse. So the Reclaiming of the Expanse starts to give you, some ideas about what it's like to live in the Expanse, what it's like to be an adventurer in the Expanse, and then you get into the histories, the very next section, to give you the background of all the major events leading up to modern day in the Mwangi Expanse. So, going all the way back to the Age of Serpents, when the Serpent people used to rule it, up through the Age of Legend, the Age of Darkness, the Age of Anguish, the Age of Destiny, the Age of Atonement, the Age of Lost Omens, which of course is the modern day, and then boom, you arrive in the people of Mwangi. Now, in regard to the history of this area, they do of course have a lot of historical events that have already been talked about, like the Age of Serpents, which has already been talked about in other books in the Pathfinder line. But then they also have a lot of stuff that is also somewhat based on, real world events. So of course we're talking about West Africa, that in the real world was a very much a center for the slave trade. So they do dip into that a little bit here. They now you're not in the real world, though. You are in Golarion, the world of Golarion, and you're not really in West Africa. You're in the Mwangi Expanse. So the level of how much the slave trade has affected that area, while it is still a thing, it is not as severe as it was in the real world, because a lot of the peoples there were able to overthrow colonizers and stop the slave trade in a lot of areas. It does still exist in some parts of the Mwangi Expanse, so they did want to still have it as a theme that you can play with if you want to, but it's not as severe in Golarion as it is on Earth. So I did want to just talk about that a little bit. I think they've actually, in regard to that particular storyline beat, they've reached a very interesting, delicate balance of still representing it while not making it, the main theme that you have to play with. Then we get, like I said, then we have the people of the Mwangi. Now, so for the people of the Mwangi, it starts off with the various human peoples of the Mwangi Expanse, of which there are quite a few. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pages dedicated to the various human people that live in the Mwangi Expanse. Both native and non-native, because there are people descended from some colonizers that had come in here. As well as you have people that definitely look West African versus some people that look more North African in their flavoring of what they are all about. Then we get into the first group of elves, which are the Elijah. Now, the Elijah are a very interesting group. One of the coolest quirks with them that I like is they have this whole theme about making these magical masks that they don't really wear as a mask. They either put them on their walls or wear them on other parts of their outfits, but they're enchanted to almost sort of be like a magical tape recorder, and you tell them bits of your family legacy, your story, and they record it and can repeat it back, which is pretty interesting. Now, then the section on the Elijah is pretty sizable. Most of the sections in here on a lot of the different groups are. You have 10 pages devoted to the Elijah. Now, next we have the Akuje, which is another group of elves. These are more of a jungle elf sort of feel to them. These guys are a smaller group of elves that take it upon themselves to be hunting and clearing out demonic ruins. But again, you have another 10 pages devoted to them. One of the interesting things I like about these various groups where they talk about this particular culture and go into incredible detail, they'll talk about some of their cities, etc. But they also specifically will have often a specific NPC of that group fully fleshed out at the end of their section. Next, we have the third and final group of the elves, the Kalije. Again, another group of African-themed elfish people. Again, another 10 pages devoted to them. Now, I'm going to speed on a little through there, not because they're less interesting. I do think all the elves are interesting, but I did think it was a little much to have 3 groups of elves. I really wanted to get on, I have to admit, when I was reading this section of the book, where we had 10 pages each, especially since there were less pages than that devoted to all of the human communities, though then there are later sections devoted to their various city-states and such that go back into more detail on them. But because there was 30 pages just devoted to the 3 groups of elves, I was wanting to rush ahead and get to the more unique people of this region. So the next we get into some of the groups of dwarves. Now, the dwarves I actually did find quite interesting, even though, again, we know plenty about dwarves from other books, but they are the Mbeke, which are a group of dwarves that are very closely related to cloud dragons that live up in the mountains in the Mwangi Expanse, and also have, because of their kinship with the cloud dragons, also have a bit of a kinship with some kobolds that live there, which is very interesting and different. And their NPC is King Thabsing Blood-Eyed, which is a really cool NPC. So the next group of dwarves are the Teralu. Now, there are only 2 groups of dwarves versus the 3 groups of elves. And the Teralu actually are quite interesting in that they have, again, a very interesting culture based around this particular dragon that they had made an oath to bring to its homeland and inter there. Again, the dwarves in the Mwangi Expanse are very closely related to the cloud dragons, and I do find them quite interesting. Both groups are. Next, we have the one group of halflings, or at least large enough group of halflings to really talk about, that is in the Mwangi Expanse, which are the Songo. They were interesting. I did like the Songo, but I'm not a huge halfling fan. I know the horror. I love Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, but when it comes to role-playing games, I've never been like a huge halfling fan. But I actually have to admit that I did find some of the cultural aspects of these particular halflings very interesting. I really liked their whole unique martial arts fighting style with a pair of short staves that they used, kind of stick fighting. And then I actually found them more interesting than I thought I was going to. So that was kind of cool. The next group is the orcs from the Mwangi Expanse, which are the Mantanji. Now, the Mantanji are perceived very different by their surrounding cultures than orcs in most other parts of the world. Whereas most other parts of the world, orcs are seen as violent, brutish, frightening creatures that maybe you would want to avoid. In the Mwangi Expanse, the orcs are seen more as heroic demon slayers, which is really pretty freaking cool. And I love the orcs in here. This was a great section. I love all the discussion on their faiths and their culture. I found them very interesting. But finally, once we get past the orcs of the Mwangi Expanse, we get into the new unique ancestries to the Mwangi Expanse. And this is the part where I really felt the people of the Mwangi section shined, because I love the new groups. So the first one is the Inati. Now, when I was a kid, I was a big fan of the stories of Anansi, who, of course, if you're familiar or not, was a deity from West Africa, from West African legend and myth, where he was a god of storytelling and trickery, and would also take the form of a spider. And the Inati are obviously very much based on him, as is also the deity Grandmother Spider, which also has been talked about in some other Pathfinder books. Both are very much based on Anansi. So the Inati are intelligent spiders that have a magical ability to shapeshift into a human-looking form. They are awesome. These guys are really great. This is a fantastic addition to the various ancestries of the Pathfinder world. I love them. Next, we have the Kanrasu, which are more spiritual, ethereal beings that make these construct bodies to be able to move around in. Kind of weird. I wasn't really sure when reading them how into playing one I would be, but they were interesting and they were very different. After them, we had the Gnolls as a playable race. Now, I love Gnolls. I love them, one, because they're hyena people, and two, just because I like animal people in general, and I like hyenas. So I'm a big fan of the Gnolls. And I like how they did the Gnolls here. The Gnolls are very varied. You can be a really big Gnoll that can push their weight around, or you can be, there's a type of tiny Gnoll called the Ant Gnoll, where they're basically like halfling sized. And that's really awesome to me. I love that they did a lot of variety in the Gnolls. Then we had another new group of a playable ancestry known as the Goloma, which were very interesting and very freaky looking, though mostly their scary appearances to frighten off dangerous enemies, because in reality they're not vicious monsters and are quite really interesting and cool ancestry. Then we had a group of frog people, and again, I love anthropomorphic animal people in role-playing games, and these guys are the Greepli. They look like tree frogs turned into humanoids, and they were very interesting, and they had a lot of poisonous abilities, which is really cool. Similar to how the spider people, the Inati, had some venomous abilities. So, of course, the difference between venom and poison is if you inject it with fangs, it's venom. If you just have it in your skin, it's poison. So, and then we had the Shisk, which were very human-looking porcupine-type people, and they had a lot of really cool abilities where they could use the porcupine quills and like to throw at people, or as a defensive way if someone tried to grapple them, to stab them with the quills. These guys were very interesting too, mechanically speaking. And then we go into some descriptions of the other various peoples of the Mwangi Expanse, many of which we have seen before. For instance, the cat folk, we have seen the cat folk before, the lizard folk, kobolds, etc. But again, there were some other newer people that we have not seen before, like the Biloca, or the Chirao. Now, these are not playable races, but they do show up as NPCs and monsters later in this book, and it was good that they spent some time going over them. Again, in addition to the places that other beings that we are already familiar with have in this part of the world, the kind of place that they have in the Mwangi Expanse. Now, the next section went into the religion. So there were some new deities that we had in here that we had not seen before, but there were also some older deities like Grandmother Spider, who had showed up in the Gods and Magic book, I believe. So that it was a mix of both, but there were some really, really interesting gods. I really appreciated reading about all these various deities: good, evil, lawful, chaotic, etc. And I also found a section in here very interesting on reading about gods that we already know about and just how they are represented and worshipped differently in the Mwangi Expanse. Because sometimes they might have versions of them that have more of an African flair to them, where they would, it's the same deity, but different people represent them in their artwork as looking like themselves, as is something that happens in the real world. So I really did like that. I thought that was pretty cool. Next, we have what is the largest section in this book. It is the geography. The geography section in this book is absolutely enormous. So it begins on page 147 and it ends on page 287. So this is by far the largest section of the book, and it can be a little intimidating because there's just so much in here. But be aware that after reading the general information about the geography and climate and weather in the different regions of the Mwangi Expanse, you then could just read the specifics about the particular city you're going to have your character start in and slowly read it while you're doing the campaign, reading sections that you think are areas that your players might want to visit. So don't just take this section one section at a time. I do recommend, if you're reading this book for the first time, focus on the areas you're going to want to start in and then read the rest as you go. But you can actually skip the rest of this and come back to it later. That said, it's fantastic, and there is lots of detail in here about things like the climate and the specific way that these different regions differ from one another. You have the Bandu Hills, and you have, after going over all of the specific wildlife and climate and interesting people you might find there, you then get to the barrier wall. Moving on, you then have the Mwangi jungle, followed by the Kavalands, and then Lake Okota, which was really cool. Lots of cool monsters, including a big water worm here. And then the Magumo Plains, the ruins of Ko, which was a very interesting place with some crystalline enemies. And then the Screaming Jungle. Now, all these are generally about the regions as a whole. The next being the Sodden Lands. So they don't go into too much detail about the specific civilizations or cities there. Next, you have the Turva Uplands. Then, once you get past all of that, now we dive into the actual cities. So they start having these big, deep dives on the particular cities and city-states of the Mwangi Expanse. And the city-states are incredibly varied. You have, pirate havens, full of cutthroats and ne'er-do-wells such as Blood Cove. Then you have places like Jaha, a mysterious place where all of the people disappeared and new people are coming back and making a new civilization out of the ruins, while also trying to investigate what happened to the previous people there. Or, for instance, the city of Kibway, which is a city shaped like a heart with mysterious ancient statues that guard the city from the walls, but nobody really knows what it is that brings them to life. They were there. This is an empty city that was discovered by people. Then you have the city of Masali, which is kind of a North African city. Definitely has an Egyptian feel to it. It is ruled by a god king, which is actually a resurrected mummy of basically a pharaoh. who now rules the city as a undead slash living god, which is very much in line with, of course, Egyptian mythology. You have the city of Nantambu, which is full of canals and markets and amazing things. Yeah, I love the level of depth they go into in the cities. One of the most interesting cities here is the city of Osaibu. I found this one incredibly interesting because of the fact that it has one of the most important people in the city is a arboreal, which of course are like the Galarian version of Ents, and there is this bizarre artifact called the Nemesis Well in the city that the city is built around to protect, to guard it, because it is some very dangerous, horrible artifact, but it's like slowly tearing the city apart. Yeah, there are many cities in here with all sorts of different themes. They're really fantastic. I've talked about a lot of them. There's a lot more. One more I just want to make a brief reference to is Usara, which is this chaotic city that used to be ruled by the Gorilla King and is overrun with demonic worshipping evil peoples. But yeah, there are tons of cities in here with all different themes, and they're great. They're all really, really fantastic. So once we get past the geography section, we get to the Bestiary. So the Bestiary begins with a section where it lists tons of creatures, animals, monsters, demons, etc. that could show up in the Mwangi Expanse, and it tells you where do you find them. Do you find them in Bestiary 2, and then what page? Do you just find them in the Bestiary, and then what page? Now, there are tons and tons of monsters listed here, going from Bestiary to Bestiary 3. It works as a nice little quick reference, but it is a reminder also that this is not fully playable as its own setting book without a few other books. You are going to want to have at least Bestiary 1 and 2, and, of course, the regular Pathfinder book, along with this to run a campaign in the Mwangi Expanse. Now, moving on from that, we have some new creatures. So, of course, just like every time we get new ancestries, they have to provide some basic NPCs slash enemies for you to use of those ancestries. So we have some Anadi in here because we have the new Anadi. We have a bizarre new type of cursed giant with eyes on the bottoms of their feet called the Agamuksa. We have this strange clawed primate-looking creature that jumps down from trees at you called the Asenbosum. We have the Biloca, which was one of the creatures I talked about earlier. They're actually a small humanoid crocodilian Fey race. Very weird. They've got their own city in there. And then again, speaking of small monstrous creatures that have their own city, we have the Chirao-Ka, which are servants or were servants of the Gorilla King before he was killed, and they again have their own city and settlement. Then we have enormous monsters like the Groot-Slaying, which is a bizarre mixture of snake and elephant and just horrendous. And we have this bizarre half real, half ethereal creature, the Kanona. And then, yeah, lots of more strange animals and beasts like the Kava, the Karina, the Maliada that looks like a magical giant hippopotamus. We have the Mamlambo, which again is a big aquatic reptilian creature. The Rampo, the Segulo. Lots of cool monsters in the Bestiary. And then, of course, we round it out with a glossary and index. The totality of the book, including the glossary and the index, is a total of 311 pages long. And there's a ton of content in here. I mean, this is jam-packed. There's lots of artwork, but there's also lots of text and a lot of pages. We're talking full color printing, proper old school thread binding, hardcover book, really beautiful production, beautiful artwork like you've come to expect from everything from Paizo, because that's how they roll. Yeah, this is a really well done book, and the information here is fantastic. So, you know, the Reclaiming the Expanse and the history, it gives you a good idea of what the area is like, what the politics are like, what the feel of the region is like. The people of the Mwangi, I had one little complaint in here that I felt they spent too much time on the Elves, and to a lesser extent, maybe too much time on the Dwarves as well. Because each group of the Elves actually had more space given it to to them than the entirety of all the various human settlements and people in the Mwangi Expanse combined, though they did get more information on their cities later in the book, and they did include the information on the cities and civilizations of the Elves, and then the Dwarves, and then the one group of Halflings, etc. in that section. I did feel like there was a little too much time given to ancestries that we already kind of knew a lot about, except that this was just a new version of those ancestries. Especially because once we did get into, this is one of my few complaints again, once we did get into the new ancestries that I was far more interested about, because we'd never heard anything about the Inati, for instance, which are hands down my favorite new ancestry in this book. I love the Inati. The Inati have a total, with their storyline bits and all of the new rules for them, for their feats, etc., they have a total of 4 pages devoted to them. I really felt like we could have gotten 10 pages devoted to the Inati, 10 pages devoted to the Kanrasu, and 10 pages devoted to the Knolls, and 10 pages devoted to the Goloma, and I felt like each group of Elves could have gotten 4 pages. They didn't need 10 pages each. Same with each group of Dwarves, for that matter. As interesting as they were, I wanted more information on the brand new ancestry. So it's a minor gripe, but it was something I did want to talk about a little bit. I almost forgot to talk about the fact that, the Gripleys should have gotten 10 pages devoted to them as well. The religion section was fantastic. Once I got past all of the new ancestries, which I love all the new ancestries, I love reading about the gods. The geography section is huge. Now, it's needed because you're getting a really in-depth view of what each of the cities and each of the regions are like in this enormous region, this enormous part of the world. But like I say, this part can be a little intimidating to you the first time you read it. So, focus in, based on the brief descriptions you get earlier on in the book of the different regions, focus in on where you want your campaign to start. Read that area. Read the general regions of the book, and then you can come back to the other specific city-states and read more about them in between games, so that later you can be read up on them for if your players decide to go there. Once you get past the geography of the bestiary is a little anemic because there are plenty of other creatures and monsters and animals that show up in the first 3 bestiaries to fully populate all of the Mwangi Expanse. But there are a few really interesting new monsters here, and I love all of the new additions. There are some that are incredibly important because of how often you will have to run into them, or if you go to specific areas of the Mwangi Expanse, the fact that they may be the dominant species in those areas. So overall, I really like this book. I think this is very well done, and actually, after reading it, this is a place I would love to play a game of Pathfinder in. And I would love to play an ancestry from this area. There were multiple ancestries that really stuck out to me. If you couldn't tell already, yes, the Inati. I would love to play an Inati character. I think the Inati are fantastic. And I really, really recommend the Mwangi Expanse to you, both if you might want to play there, also if you might want to play or allow a character to be playing a character from there, and also just if you want to fill in your knowledge on all of the areas of Golarion. This is a great in-depth look at this area of Golarion. I hope they do more books like this to give you a lot of insight in depth of different parts of the world. I would love to have books like this in my collection from other parts of the Golarion world, from the Far East to the South, all over. And in particular, I want to draw attention to a couple of specific interesting things in here. There were a couple of bits in here where they had recipes. They had a recipe for a rub to put on meat and cook, which was kind of cool. It was a real recipe that you could make. And there was also a recipe for doing hot chocolate. Now, interestingly enough, in the recipe for hot chocolate, they refer to the fact that chocolate comes from somewhere over the seas. Because in the real world, chocolate, of course, came from the Americas. It was something from South and Central America. And they referenced that, I didn't know this, but apparently, and I guess it's canon now, the Golarion equivalent to the Americas has been discovered at this time. I need to know more about that. I want books on that part of the world too. This book was fantastic. It was a joy to read. It's an awesome place to play in, and with lots of great ancestries to play as, and also lots of great monsters, and lots of great details about the region in here. I don't know if you can tell, but I am gushing. I really enjoyed this book, and I highly recommend it. If you're a game master, and like I said, if you have any plans on either allowing players to play characters from here or possibly journeying to here or running a whole campaign here, this is a must-have for your collection. Also, if you are a collector of the books, this is a great book to add to your collection. I am going to give the Pathfinder, the Mwangi Expanse, 9 out of 10 stars. This is a fantastic book. I love having this in my collection, and I highly recommend it to you. So if you enjoyed this review and tutorial of a role-playing game product and you'd like to see me do more like it, be sure to give it a like, share it on all forms of social media, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Board Game Captain. That's Captain spelled a K on YouTube. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns about the Mwangi Expanse or this video, feel free to put them in the comments down below. And until next time, game on. The next group of dwarves we had... Hi. What you doing? Oh, what are you doing? You gotta watch it with them claws. Yes. What can I do for you? What can I do for the Mr. Pupperman? Huh? Nothing? Just wanted to come and say hi? Is that it? Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, I'll give you a hug. Okay. Would you go play with your toys so I can finish videoing my video? Okay? Okay? Come on. You go down. You go play with your toys.